What embarrassing realization did you only have once you were in your late 20s or 30s? Story 1. When I was a little kid, my mom told me that if I pulled the fire alarm, it would spray ink on me so that the fire department would know who pulled it. That kept me from ever pulling it as a prank. Fast forward to when I am 26, I was in grad school and happened to be around when someone was doing a fire safety drill. They asked if I wanted to pull the handle. I promptly replied that I had on a new shirt I didn't want to get ink on. They looked at me like I had 3 heads. After learning the truth, we all had a good laugh in the end. Called my parents immediately after to share the story. They were dying laughing. Story 2. I visited my childhood home when I was 27 or so, visiting my parents. I looked at the street sign and realized the name of the house I lived in from 4 to college was spelled Somerset 1M instead of Somerset 2MS. I was literally misspelling my home address for nearly 2 decades. Story 3. That everyone else is too caught up in their own lives to give a f about what you're doing. No one cares what you do with your life. This frees you to be yourself. I'm someone who has lived with horrible social anxiety since the age of 15. I'm now 29, and while I still struggle with it, it has definitely become easier knowing that no one is watching and critiquing me in public like I thought they were. Story 4. That it's never done. As a kid I thought that adults have boring calm life with nothing to decide on anymore, but I guess it will never be like that. Story 5. I am a no-native English speaker and for 25 years, I thought awful was more positive than awesome, like a combination of awesome and beautiful. This is your wife and she's pregnant. Whoa, that's so awful, man. Story 6. That I was kind of a bully during high school, only realized it when someone commented positively on how I had stopped making fun of people. I still think of the couple of friends from school who immediately stopped talking to me after graduating and feel terrible about it. I've reached out to a couple of them to apologize, but haven't managed to reach all of them. Story 7. I thought successful was a huge wage, huge responsibility, working all hours, heavily qualified, etc. Turned out, my version of success is just feeling secure and having time to myself to do the things that make me happy. I didn't need a huge wage to do those things. Story 8. That those majestic white doves released at events end such were not in fact wild birds being set free in a nice moment, but effing homing pigeons that can't wait to get home supper. I was well into my 30s. Story 9. This has to do with a medical term in German, which is my mother tongue. You may or may not know that Germans love their compound words. In German, a slipped herniated disc is called Bandscheibenvorfall. Bandscheibe is the word for spinal disc. Vorfall can be translated to incident, so for the longest time I thought Bandscheibenvorfall means some kind of unlucky incident with a spinal disc. However, in this case, Vorfall doesn't mean incident. It's actually a compound of the words vor and fall, which roughly translates to slipped out of place. So Bandscheibenvorfall just means that your disc slipped out of place, in very much the same way the English term does. I just never realized because I was so stuck on Vorfall meaning incident, and I always thought it's such an odd name for a medical condition. I was 36 when I finally realized it. Story 10. If a packet of, say, instant soup is upside down and all the powder is at the wrong end, you can just open the wrong end. I've always tipped it the right way and tap the powder down. It did not even occur to me that this was not necessary until this week. I am 35. Story 11. I am very career-driven. I thought I wanted a partner who was also career-driven. Turns out, absolutely not. My husband is the type who has a job he somewhat enjoys, but has zero career ambitions. His goals are entirely outside of his work. This is the only reason it has been possible for me to pursue my career goals. When I was younger, I thought lack of career ambition was the same thing as lack of ambition. I actually broke up with my now spouse when we were dating in our early 20s over this, so glad we found our way back to each other when I had things more figured out. Story 12. My dad has a skin tag on his ear, but he always called it a. I was talking with a friend and I hear them say, and I said my dad has one of those on his ear, like all proud to have something in common. The look and the questions that ensued were hilarious and mortifying. Promptly called my dad and said, WDF dad. We still laugh. Story 13. The people on Sesame Street were actors Bob, Maria, Gordon and Mr. Hooper were not their real names. Wish I was joking. Bert, Ernie, Oscar and Elmo played themselves, of course. Story 14. This is so embarrassing. Like 4 years ago, I'm 34, my coworkers were talking about Alaska and I said something like, how long does it take to fly down there? Am I in the US? I legit just took the US map they showed us with the US and Hawaii and Alaska in boxes on the bottom left as fact. Why did they do that, like God? Story 15. I was around 8 to 10 and went to Florida for the summer to visit my grandma. We went to Applebee's and she told me that Applebee's had a rule where you couldn't eat there unless you were with your grandparents. I believed her. Flash forward to when I was 19. A couple of work buddies wanted to go to Applebee's and I genuinely laughed, telling them we couldn't go because no one had their grandparents with them. We all had a good laugh about it. Story 16. As a child, my dad told me about an animal called a side hill gouger. Basically, it lived on the side of mountains and had legs that were shorter on one side so it could stand upright. This came up in conversation many times as I grew up and I never questioned it. One day, in my early 20s, I finally became aware enough to ask my dad what happens when it wants to change directions. I swear the man almost wet himself from laughing too hard. Turns out it's a French fairy tale of sorts. Story 17. I definitely didn't look after my teeth in my younger years. Not only is it mortifyingly embarrassing, it also feels stupid as hell trying to turn it around in my late 30s. Story 18. That I could make an active choice to be kind to myself. In my head, I don't have to be mean or strict or whatever, I could just choose to be my own friend. It takes a lot of the weight of when you're there for yourself. Story 19. The word month is derived from the word moon. This was a cascade revelation because ID previously observed that the moon cycle was approximately a month long, but I failed to connect that the length of the month is an arbitrary decision about how to measure time based on that lunar cycle. Story 20. As a non-native English speaker, I only realized strawberries are called strawberries because you use straw under the plant to make sure the berries don't touch the soil and get bad. Story 21. Kindness matters. 20's closer to 17 to 19 I figured out I was cringe AF in high school who wasn't. It's a realization everyone ends up having, at different levels, was at the top of my class back then and used to tutor my classmates for free and a lot of the times would expect the girls to like me as like reciprocation. Super incel vibes. Disclaimer, not to the point of hating women. I still cringe at it today. In my early 20s I don't know if this is an embarrassing realization or not, but the entire time I was trying to find a partner I always was insecure about my looks and never looked inward and thought about my personality. Once I realized you can be ugly AF and still get laid, still have a relationship, and that the people you should be with care about who you are and your personality more than how you look. Changed my life, but I feel robbed of my youth thinking that way for so long and I still get the ick at my old self about it. I'm 30 now, thriving in life but still looking back on those old memories and cringing at them. A lot of the time just wishing I had been more social back in the day but no regrets, just lessons learned from being a dumb teen. Side anecdote, something I did when I was 19 still me up today, was on vacation in Japan for the first time, knew a bit of Japanese and was trying to flirt with someone at a bar and it was going well but I had hay fever seasonal allergy from the pollen here, not really a fever and was sneezing the entire time I was talking to her. She asked me if I was okay and I was trying to say pollen allergy but instead the words out my mouth were horny, very similar sounding words, just my weak language skills me up. She changed seats instantly and I have never lost that memory. Story 22. Well, I found out I'm autistic, except I thought I was high masking and flying under the radar, everyone else knew or highly suspected, I was the last to realize. It's very embarrassing, but kinda nice my friends knew and still love me for me anyway. Story 23. I fully believed you weren't allowed to go to Chuck E. Cheese unless you were invited to a birthday party. My parents told me that, which is why we never went. I was 25, driving past one and I told my friends how lame it was that I was never invited to a birthday party there as a kid. They looked at me like I was insane. Apparently you can just go to Chuck E. Cheese. I called my parents and I think they died laughing. Story 24. I thought vampires drink through their fangs. Like through a straw. Spoiler, they don't. They use the fangs to crack the skin so the victim starts bleeding. So it is way more brutal than I thought. Story 25. Only women will get this one, but I was 35 when I realized that you're not supposed to put tampons down the toilet. I always thought when they said not to discard them down the toilet that they meant the cardboard bit that goes on the outside and I was always like, well yeah, that'll ruin the plumbing for sure. Turns out the gross blood part that's inside you also isn't supposed to go in the toilet. I've been out here wrecking local plumbing for the last 25 years. I've become a rampant advocate against any civil or cleaning staff who suggest that women's bathrooms are dirtier grosser to clean than men's. Like, okay, if you set it up properly for us then we'll be clean. You try to pull a little cotton tube out of your, and then wrap it in toilet paper, and try to find a disposal can they're always broken without getting blood on yourself or anything around you. It's near impossible. When people or books mention Vietnam vets, I thought till my 30s that they were people who had gone to Vietnam to look after sick animals. Story 26. Oh, this is embarrassing. I was 30 when I realized that orchid the plant and orchard where they grow fruit are not pronounced the same. I used to laugh inside at people mispronouncing orchard and wondering why they'd pronounce the ch. Well, jokes was on me. Story 27. I just realized how absolutely unstable I was emotionally in my early 20s, and that was pretty embarrassing. Oh, thank God for psychedelics and therapy. Story 28. Every time I would get a new stick of deodorant, I would have an awful time getting the plastic plug cap out of it. I would always have to use my teeth because it was so hard to get out. I was 26 I think, when I realized, I can just twist the deodorant up until the plug is completely out. Story 29. There was an old fruit canning factory in my hometown. Growing up, it was always just called the Canning Factory. I'm in the South, so saying Canning Factory with a southern accent came across in my young mind as Cannon Factory. It wasn't until I was an adult that I realized that they canned fruit and didn't make weapons for pirate ships. Story 30. That the UK TV soap called EastEnders is called EastEnders because they were from the East End. I spent my childhood and teens watching it every night with my family. Then one random day in my late 20s, after having not seen it in 6 years, it just clicked. Story 31. Marvin, the Martian, was expecting an earth-shattering kaboom. Not because earth-shattering means really really loud, but because he was trying to blow up the earth. Story 32. Elton John song, Crocodile Rock. When he's singing about Rock dying but the years went by and Rock just died, I thought he was singing about a dog called Rock, and him dying always made me really really sad. Story 33. Embarrassing. Don't worry, Facebook memories keep reminding me what I was all throughout 2008 to 2020. Weird status updates. Cringe writing on the wall and poking friends. Subway is called Subway because they make subs your way. Story 34. The song lyrics aren't "Don't come around tonight, 'cause he's bound to take your life." There's a baboon on the right, but "Don't come around tonight." Well, it's bound to take your life. there's a bad moon on the rise, and I used to sing it loudly and confidently. Story 35. The house my grandparents lived in had a decorative G above the garage. I was 20 when I realized it represented their last name and was not G for grandma like I had thought since I was a little girl. Story 36. Honk if you're stickers. I thought they were actually a call to action. My husband couldn't stop laughing when he explained that one to me a couple of months ago. I'm 27. Story 37. My grandparents were children of immigrants, and were originally raised with their parents' country of origins, culture, and languages. When growing up, it was incredibly hard for them to integrate because they barely knew English or American customs, and thus they decided to only speak English going forward and raise my parents as American as they could, and they didn't teach them the languages they originally spoke. Therefore, I was raised speaking English only, and occasionally my parents would say a phrase or two they had picked up but explain to little kid me it was a different language that my grandparents spoke but lost. Yet when I was in elementary and middle school, I'd say certain words and my classmates or teachers would give me a funny look and stare, until I clarified what I meant, thinking I just pronounced it wrong or stuttered. This occurred often my entire life. Even my partner would ask what I meant sometimes but would just conclude they had never heard that word before and I was using an obscure English synonym. In my late 20s, I was in an ethnic grocery store, and a mother was talking to her child in Polish, and later another couple was speaking Czech, I think. I stood there in shock as I heard them say a handful of words I've been saying all my life. These same words I've been saying while fully believing and insisting were English, to friends, co-workers, and even worse, strangers. Turns out my parents didn't always clarify to me when they were saying the very few Polish and Czech words they had heard from my grandparents. They assumed I just knew it wasn't English. I wasn't even saying them properly in the original language, more like absolutely butchered them, so of course nobody picked up they were those languages either. I cringed knowing I constantly said near gibberish with full confidence to strangers. No wonder they looked at me like I had two heads. Story 38. When I was about 6 or 7, my dad went to help my grandpa get a dead possum out of the car. I tagged along because I had nothing else going on because I was 6 or 7. They got the possum out of the garage and put it in the trash. I got upset that the possum wasn't getting a proper funeral. My dad told me that the garbage men would find the dead possum, bury it at the dump, and say a little prayer for it. That was good enough for me, and I went inside and had some cookies with my grandma. I was 26 when I realized that's not a service the garbage men offered. Story 39. That my parents' relationship with money was diabolical and not conducive at all to surviving, particularly in the more recent economy. Guess what I mimicked from them until it was almost way too late. Story 40. Late 30s. Have recently realized what an insufferable know-it-all I was in my 20s at work. No wonder I had problems with people. They weren't the problem, I was, and now I work with people in their early 20s, who behave like I did back then, and I just want to tell them to come talk to me 10 years from now. We will revisit this situation, and you'll understand so much more than you think you understand now. Story 41. Yesterday was my 36th birthday and nobody gave a. It was the loneliest, most depressing day I've had in a long time, and if it's honestly a glimpse into my bleak future, I promise you I'm not making it to 37. I'll try to change some things, but I feel like being there for others has only ever left me alone, and am not okay, nor have I been in a very long time, maybe ever. Story 42. When I was younger and people told me they got something that fell off a truck, I was so surprised and thought, wow, what a timing to be there when it fell off that truck. Story 43. If you never want to ruin a pair of underwear with period stains again, just only buy black underwear. I've spent entirely too many years having regular menstrual cycles to have only figured that out a few years ago. Story 44. When I was about 6, we got a hamster called Bit of a Houdini who liked to kamikaze off the top of his 3-story cage, which eventually resulted in a vet visit where the vet surprised us with the revelation that was, in fact, female. We all had a good laugh, but she kept the name no heteronormativity in our house. A few years went by and one day we noticed strange lumps on Dick's belly, which meant another trip to the vet. Turns out they were testicles. Was actually male after all. It wasn't until 30 years later that Mum casually brought up in conversation that was actually 3 hamsters who they'd swapped out whenever one of them died. And here I'd been thinking for 3 decades that I'd had an extraordinarily long-lived hamster. He would have been about 6 when he eventually died for the final time. I guess Mum finally thought I could handle the concept of death at 12 years of age, that once you're fully grown, you no longer need to leave wiggle room for your toes when buying new shoes. I thought it was just so they were a comfy fit and your feet had a bit of spare room when running, etc. Until my late 20s, I was buying shoes half or a full size too big. Story 45. That you actually have to scrub exfoliate in the shower. It's not enough to just use a soft flannel or your hands to clean your body. Changed my life. I have better skin now at 41 than I did at 31. Exfoliate and moisturize. Story 46. That the apartment Alexis wants to move into on Schitt's Creek is the same one Bob's brother Carl killed himself in a season or 2 earlier. It took until my 3rd rewatch to understand the line about the fan being a breakaway model now. Story 47. Learned I was tying my shoes wrong my entire life. It wasn't until having kids of my own and needing to tie their shoes when I realized I did it differently on them than I did on myself. Apparently I do an extra loop before the pull, and my knots have always slid out my entire life and always needed a double knot. The moment I did it on their shoes, that thing was tight and not going anywhere. Story 48. The chicken crossing the road to get to the other side. The other side is a well-known euphemism for the afterlife. just not well known to me until my 30s when I finally realized why that joke is supposed to be funny. Story 49. I used to think that when book characters' inmates were served breadwater it would be some kind of soup made of wet bread, but I realized earlier than my 20s, though it was not normal FO, in my 20s I found out the average person farts 8 times per day. I understood that you actually do learn from mistakes in my 30s. Mistakes are needed and a totally normal part of life. Story 50. I was 34-ish when I found out there was more than one football game per week. I'm not a football fan, but most of my boyfriends throughout my life have been, and they'd all talk about the game, then they'd sit down and watch the game. So I thought the game was the one football pro footballers played each week. 2 teams played a week and that was it. It makes sense that they wouldn't say I'm going to watch my team play the one game they're going to play this week, and I'm not going to watch any of the other games all the other teams are playing, but it didn't help my misconception. Story 51. Not late 20s 30s but late teens. I once commented to my mother, in front of all my older siblings, that she, a devout Catholic, must be really health conscious if she took her temperature daily. She always had a thermometer on her bedside table. There was an awkward pause before realization dawned and everyone burst out laughing. Story 52. There's a song, Papa was a Rolling Stone. Wherever he laid his hat was his home. I thought the next line was, and when he died, all he left us was alone, but it's actually a loan. BC, how do you repay a loan to a dead man? Story 53. I'm learning things about myself in my 60s. For instance, I've always been anxious, but I thought it was externally driven work schedules, management at work, that sort of thing. Note that I'm retired, I'm more anxious than ever. Turns out that was all internal. There are also lots of traits of mine that tie directly to my newly understood neurodivergence. You'd think I would have known a lot of this earlier. Story 54. My sister was 27 when this episode of Cheers first aired. Until that moment, she thought the expression was doggy dog world. Story 55. Went to the dentist in my late 30s and she says, oh, you have a bone. I had no clue what she meant. I apparently have a bone in the roof of my mouth, also called a torus palatinus. I was then like WDF. She was shocked that I was shocked. So my entire life I thought everyone had this hump in the roof of their mouth and it was normal. After the appointment I immediately called my parents because, WTF, my mom said she has it, Dad didn't, and neither did my sisters. Apparently I was the only one who didn't know it was a thing. Been a few years and now I seriously question if my normal is normal. Like, does everyone see the color red like me? It's been a downward spiral. Story 56. You have to buy 2 rings when you get married. I met the love of my life, spent 2 years saving for a ring, bought the ring and proposed to my wife. The next day after proposing, my brand new fiancé asked when we get to look for the wedding ring. I was so confused, because it was on her finger. I find out that there is an engagement ring and a wedding ring. Not a single person told me that you have to buy 2 rings when you get married. I didn't have any more money, so the wedding ring was thin, cheap and crappy. Been together for 17 years. Story 57. This one is very UK specific, and very my generation specific. When I was a kid there was a guy called Dermot O'Leary, who was one of the biggest TV personalities for a little while, and around the same time a lot of companies were moving away from animal testing. I heard a lot of TV adverts and I could have sworn that dermatologically tested was Dermot O'Leary has tested, and, being a young boy who had no need for makeup and moisturizers, I didn't realize the difference when I saw it written down when I was 20. Story 58. On your vehicle's gauge cluster, there's a little arrow next to the image of a gas pump where your fuel gauge is that shows you which side of the vehicle your gas door is on. I shared this with my wife immediately and she was equally mind blown. Story 59. A little bit earlier than late 20s, but junior year of college, my roommate ran out of laundry detergent and I told her she could have some of mine, so I handed her the container of Downy. She looked at it confused and asked if I had actual detergent, and I said it's in her hand, and that's when I learned that fabric softener is not the same thing as detergent. I guess growing up my mom always got the detergent Downy, so when I finally shopped for myself, I only went for the stuff that was cheap and smelled super good. So for almost 3 years in college, I only washed my clothes with fabric softener LMAO. We still talk about it, a decade later. Story 60. I was A to my friends in high school. None of us were terribly popular, but it occurred to me that I made myself feel better by being a bit of a bully to them. Didn't occur to me at the time why everybody ditched me senior year. I reached out a year or so ago to one of them and apologized, and he was like, hey, I have high school-aged kids and they don't know what's going on at all, so I know you didn't. Story 61. The contestants on Jeopardy make their bets after they hear the final category and hearing the answer. I thought they did it at the same time they wrote their question and was always deeply confused why some would bet so much, or not enough. Story 62. I thought the New York Yankees logo, the N on the Y, was some sort of symbol. It looked like a Chinese letter to me. One day I realized it was a N for new and a Y for York. Story 63. It took me an embarrassingly long time to realize salmons are not salmon-colored on the outside. I had even cooked salmon with their silver skin attached multiple times at that point, but somehow never made the connection. Story 64. I learned that approximate meant about around. I had grown up thinking it meant exactly precisely. I still think the word sounds like it should mean exact. To add to this, I always marveled at how amazing people were at guessing others' heights, like in America's Most Wanted or Unsolved Mysteries when they were describing the perp. However now, as a woman who is 511 and on dating apps, I have become supernaturally good at guessing men's heights when unlisted. This skill even transcends into TV shows and movies. My friends are amazed at how good I am at guessing actors' heights. Finally, I became the people I mistakenly marveled at. And please don't come at me, I have dated men who are shorter than me, but not too much shorter, and let's all be for real, shorter men don't really want to date in olive oil. Story 65. Okay, I got a good one. So at 28 I, an American, had fallen for a Canadian whom I had met in the US. Her dad loved to cook, so he had me over for dinner so I could meet him and the family when I flew up to Canada for the first time. With a twinkle of mischief in his eye that I would get to know and love very much over the years, and sorely miss in his passing. He asked if I'd like some bread. I politely said I did, and he gestured at the loaf on the table. Well, cut us off a few slices, would you, please? What he knew and I didn't is that American bread and Canadian bread are very different. For one, American bread has sugar as the first ingredient, and lots of it. You'll never forget when my wife tried it for the first time and couldn't stop laughing at how disgusting she found it. Also, my future FIL, as well as the whole family, as is more common here, preferred a fresh baguette, and I had no clue how to slice one. Future FUL and Bill Uncle, all of them had a great laugh at my attempt, and oh dear Lord, I had it completely turned around. But it was all in good nature. Even I could laugh at myself, and like he always would, FIL showed me the right way of doing things, his way of welcoming me to the family. He was a top-notch prankster. Story 66. That girl in high school who was laughing at my bad jokes, flopping her hair and was adorable just to me was hitting on me. Didn't know or understand it until our 10th reunion, and she asked why I never ask her out. JFC, I was dense. Story 67. That the 25-year-old man who tried to hook up with me when I was 16 was not actually surprised when I told him I was under 18. I really always thought he thought I was older. Story 68. The chicken crossing the road joke is about a suicidal chicken running into oncoming traffic wanting to get hit by a car to die and make it to the other side. Story 69. When Aussies say they are putting shrimp on the Barbie, they are not putting it on the Barbie. I thought Barbie was just the slang term for grill, not Barbie being short for barbecue. I turned 40 this year and just had this realization this year. Story 70. 26. But when I was around 15, Facebook was booming and every single person in my school, 4,000 students, had Facebook. Like it was the thing. So me being the typical awkward shy 15 years old, I developed this fixation that I could not be seen active on Facebook. So I would log in around 7:15 a.m. whilst having breakfast. Then I could not be more active than 7:35 a.m. because then people from my year would see me active on Facebook. Now not long ago I remember I used to do that. And to this day I still don't understand why I do something so stupid. Another thing, when I was younger until the age of 12, I was embarrassed to say the word leg because I believed it was sexualized part of the body, and also I was also so embarrassed to say thank you when it was my birthday, lol. Story 71. In my 30s I found out that cows need to be impregnated to make milk. I thought making milk was just something that cows did. The most embarrassing part was when I mentioned it to my dad, who grew up working on his grandparents' dairy farm. Dead silence on his end of the phone. Story 72. When I was in my early 30s I was on a long car ride with my cousins, who were about 15 and 12. We were playing the category game where someone says a word and you have to use the last letter of that word to come up with your word. Our category was animals. We were playing for a while, so we were having trouble coming up with new animals. One of my cousins said unicorn, and we all decided we would let it count even though it's a mystical creature, not an animal. So my turn comes up. I need an animal that begins with the letter N. I say, well, since we're doing mythical animals, I'm going to go with narwhal. Turns out those are real. That unicorn-esque corn is just very misleading. Story 73. In their late 20s or early 30s, many people come to the realization that maturity is more complicated than it first appears and involves balancing obligations like relationships, profession, and money. Have you experienced anything similar? Story 74. Colonel and colonial are two different words. It hit me in my 20s in a KFC drive-thru when me and my friend argued about it. I felt like a complete idiot and still do, but there's no R in colonel and that drives me crazy. Story 75. There are too many really, on reflection, little things I've done, where I've been misguided or even misunderstood. Life is a brutal journey of reflection. I try to learn from each of them so I don't walk into things unknowingly again. Story 76. My mom was in her early 20s and married to my dad before she found out that not all museums were free. She grew up in an Air Force family and spent some time in Europe, so she never had to pay for museums until then. Story 77. That success is not a function of hard work and intelligence. Does hard work matter? Yes, as does intelligence. However, thinking that those two things are the only inputs to success is omitted variable bias in the highest degree. Story 78. Until about the age of 35, I thought that the phrase more haste less speed was an instruction, not a warning, i.e. be more hasty and less speedy. I always thought it was nonsense, or that it came from a time where haste and speed had different meanings. But it's not an instruction, it's a warning. The more you rush, the slower you'll become. I've no idea why I did not see it that way all along. It seems rather obvious now. Story 79. When I was a kid I was talking to some of the neighborhood kids about what we wanted to be when we grew up and upsides and downsides to those jobs. One girl mentioned that being a ballerina was dangerous because you might step on a rusty nail. I didn't question this at the time. Years later, when I had my own kid, I realized her parents just told her that because they didn't want to pay for ballet lessons. Story 80. I never really caught the start of Wheel of Fortune. You know the part where the hosts' names are shown on screen? Yeah, that bit. so until I was very late 20s I thought Pat Sajak's name was Patsy Jack, had only ever heard it spoken and didn't pay much attention to the show anyways. Only when I was reading a random article on the show did I realize the mistake. Story 81. I was buying shoes with room in the toes to grow into until I was 28. My shoe size was already barely in women's. Now I realize how much comfier it is wearing kids' shoes, and at least now there's always something in my size. Story 82. That if I wanted more money, I needed to work more, worked like 20-hour weeks when all my friends were working full-time, always had this sort of why am I always broke feeling, then started working full-time and was like, ah. Story 83. 1. I deadass had zero understanding of the geography of this planet until I got interested in it a couple years ago, like, absolutely clue where any country is in relation to any other, where the continents are, which countries belong to them, etc. 1. Debatably more embarrassing. That Latinos are brown because of our indigenous American heritage. It seems like it would be common sense, but I just never thought about it with any depth before. Story 84. I was told that the noises outside the groo-a-groo was from doves. I thought all my life it came from owls until my GF told me in the morning in my 30s after I got woken up from the owls. That was embarrassing but still funny after all these years.